the new MSCA generation, with the ambition to open up a new era for change, made all the more sense for POSE, as POSE has been participating along with 9 other partners since 2019 in the MSCA-funded InSPIRE Europe project. InSPIRE Europe aims to strengthen and coordinate at the European level various initiatives for the protection of scholars at risk, and Joël will present it in detail. The project will come to an end next September, and these workshops give the opportunity to highlight its achievements and its policy recommendations, as well as the prospects for the new InSPIRE Europe project, which will take over for the next 3 years. I thank very warmly the speakers who accepted to intervene in this workshop, Farkad and Refet, who will share their experience of scientific in exile, our very close partners from the InSPIRE Europe Consortium, Joël, Alexandros and Michael, and Laurent Bonnefoy, who agreed to give the keynote address and to moderate the workshop. It will not have escaped to you that there are not many women on this panel, and in fact, I'm the only one, and I am in the room. But this is due to the fact that the 3 others that we had invited were unfortunately unable to make themselves available. So it was not planned like that. Let me introduce now Laurent Bonnefoy. So Laurent is a political science researcher at CNRS, French National Center for Scientific Research, since 2013. He was previously research associate at the French Center for Archaeology and Social Science in Sanaa between 2001 and 2009, and research fellow in charge of the Palestine office of the French Institute for the Near East from 2010 to 2012. His research focuses in political and religious mobilizations in the Arabian Peninsula, in particular Salafis in Yemen, and he just came back from a 3-year-long CNRS research assignment in Oman. He is also a member of the Fariba Abdelka, the Franco-Iranian researchers imprisoned in Iran for nearly 3 years now, support committee. In his keynote address on academic freedom, Laurent will therefore be able to give us an insider's view of what it is like to work in dangerous fields and in, one imagines, often impeded working conditions. Before giving the floor to Laurent, let me end by thanking Amaryllis, our communication and advocacy officer, and Eva from PLSL for the organization of this workshop. And last but not least, thank you to all for attending it. Thank you very much. Laurent.
Well, thank you for this introduction. So I was assigned this broad talk about the issues of academic freedom. I guess one of the ways of doing it is to also talk about one's own experience as a political science, as it was mentioned earlier, and as one who works a lot on political mobilizations in the Arabian Peninsula. But first of all, and one of the reasons I'm here, is because I was asked by Fariba Adelkha's support committee to come and join the conference. So for all 1,083 days today, so that's almost 3 years, my colleague at the Série Sciences Po, Fariba Adelkha, who's a world-renowned anthropologist holding both Iranian and French passports, has been held hostage, so to speak, by the Iranian government. Much like other foreign and local researchers, she's being held on accusations of spying or of so-called propaganda against the system. But she mainly is a kind of hostage in reality, because she is used, much like others, as a bargaining chip by the Iranian authorities. And this has been going on for almost 3 years now. So she was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Accusations are baseless, and she is just targeted by the authorities for doing her job as an anthropologist who seeks to understand Iranian society. She's also been working on in other fields, in particular Afghanistan. So after she was sentenced to 6 years, in prison, she was able to leave Erin prison, the infamous prison where the Pasdaran, so the main guards of the revolution, have the upper hand. And she was placed under house arrest in October 2020. So that was 16 months after she had been arrested. And this was initially some good news, but the decision was pulled back, and she was in January 2022 put back in prison on bogus charges of violating the rules of her house arrest, and this house arrest is still controlled by an electronic bracelet. So for 6 months now, she's back in jail. She's gone through the very difficult times of COVID in the prison, this reminds us, and she's a kind of symbol of a number of trends that have developed, and that highlight that a number of governments, some of them considered to be rogue ones or ones which are hostile to our Western governments, use academics as, like I said, the bargaining chips, not to put pressure on academics per se. Well, this might be one of the reasons, but also because academics can be used to put pressure on Western governments for more broader diplomatic and at times even financial objectives. The Iranian case is obviously extreme. For Iranians, and Fariba Adelkha would be only a symbol of this, the daily condition of work when they are academics are obviously very constraining. Last week, a sociologist, Saeed Madani, was arrested for simply commenting on demonstrations, which is something that probably a lot of us, if we were sociologists, would be doing on a very frequent basis. The effect of this is that it has become, for Iranians, but also for foreigners, almost impossible to carry out fieldwork in Iran. And this is creating a very worrying trend, because it is transforming such a massive society, such a brilliant and great civilization as Iran, as a kind of black hole. A black hole where almost no one can understand what is happening, and even journalists are unable to work. What is problematic is that this pressure being put on universities and on academics is also having a cost which is broader than that. It is not only people who focus on contemporary issues which are at risk, but also archaeologists, for instance. And for a country with such a magnificent civilization as Iran, this can come at a cost at some point. In particular, since heritage sites, archaeology is no longer being valued, and a number of countries in the area obviously bet that tourism is a source of revenue, which is important. But what's important also is that Iran is surely not an isolated case. More and more states are developing techniques of surveillance and control that put researchers at risk. So the trend in itself is very worrying, and it involves a number of techniques which are also fast developing. Obviously, the Middle East is one of the areas which is most concerned with the issue, and I believe that a number of the academics which have been supported by the PAUSE program come from this area. We have two colleagues coming from Turkey, and we all have heard about the issues there. But what's really interesting, I think, is also that this trend does not only concern governments which are more or less or directly hostile to Western governments. This is also a trend which is fast developing in a number of countries which we, or our governments, Western ones, consider as allies. A case in point would be the United Arab Emirates. There was, in 2018, an issue with a PhD student who came from the United Kingdom. His name was Matthew Hedges, who was accused of spying by the United Arab Emirates. He was sentenced to life in prison, so not something which is in any way light. It was not only being expelled from the country, but he stayed for 6 months in confinement. Thankfully, he was pardoned by the ruler of the Emirates. But this actually showed that even in countries which our governments consider to be our allies, you can have similar developments. Another example would be from Egypt, and this is probably the most brutal one. The case of another PhD student, Giulio Regeni, who was bluntly killed by the Egyptian police in 2016. Obviously this generated a trauma, but people in Italy and from his university of origin in the United Kingdom will probably tell you that the issue in itself did not generate the kind of political mobilizations that you would have had he been maybe a journalist or someone working for a company. What is also worrying is that you find out that European states themselves are also providing resources that are used to repress academics. This obviously is the case when our governments sell weapons, but also a different number of material, which is then used to control what is being published on the internet, or what is or also police material, which are widely used to curb on public freedoms. Of course, beyond the brutal cases that I've mentioned, which are foreign researchers, so Fariba, her partner Roland Marchal, who was also imprisoned with her for 6 months, Matthew Hedges, Giulio Regeni, were the first people who are concerned with this curb on academic freedoms are people who originating from the societies that they focus on or they work in. Numbers and names would be numerous. I would mention Hulia Dincer from Turkey, Nasser Ben Raith from the UAE, Ismail Alexandrani from Egypt, not to mention colleagues from China, who actually pay the highest cost of these trends. They are not, the academics themselves are not the only ones who pay the cost, but also their families, obviously, as they too can be used as bargaining chips, even for people, and I think this might be an issue that we will raise later, who have found a refuge outside of the country. When they have their family which has stayed in the country of origin, this can be also a problem. Myself, I can say that I'm particularly sensitive to the issue for a variety of reasons. As it was mentioned, I have worked in different areas of the Middle East, worked and lived there, and particularly of the Arabian Peninsula, again, which are broadly allies of the West, and yet which treat academics and Western academics rather poorly. I myself was expelled from Yemen in 2009 while I was living there with my family, including a 3-month-old baby. This generated an important trauma, I think. And for me, whatever border I'm crossing is always an issue. Last time I was in Saudi Arabia, it took me 8 years to actually get the 8 hours, sorry, to actually get the security clearance, not knowing what would happen. I'm not in the position to actually think that I will go to jail for a long time. Saudi Arabia is not Iran. Whatever they might do to some of their citizens in Istanbul, like journalist Jamal Khashoggi. But this is something which, in a way, has become the daily or routine aspect of things when it comes to being an academic working on contemporary societies. I would mention also that I have lived for 2.5 years in East Jerusalem, taking care, as it was mentioned, of the Palestinian branch of public research institute, well, I can tell you that taking a flight from Tel Aviv usually meant that I would end up in my underwears being questioned for 3 or 4 hours. And what's also, and then there again, I mean, Israel is probably, I don't know in your different disciplines, but an actor which you consider to be a partner much more than one who actually puts pressure on academics. And I can say also the same about the United States. I always end up, having spent a lot of time in Yemen, being randomly selected. Whenever I'm boarding an American flight, they always tell me, oh, you've been randomly selected. I'm like, oh, okay, what's going to happen? Why do I always get randomly selected? So then they'll search, then they'll ask me a number of questions, which I have no clue whatsoever what the reason for asking me this. Once I was asked, is the Yemeni government functional or dysfunctional? Okay, the Yemeni government is an ally of the United States in the war on terror, but what does it mean? What is the right answer? And this, more broadly, comes in an environment which is more generally, I would say, puzzling, because we're all confronted as academics, and particularly probably ones who work on contemporary issues, to kind of contradictory demands. Our institutions, and it is the case of the CNRS, would ask us to stay safe, meaning using encryption, for instance, traveling with empty computers, which probably none of us actually do, and having an encrypted computer might be dysfunctional because in the end it means that you have something to hide. And so you have this demand to stay safe, and yet at the same time to share your knowledge and research to wider audiences, and engage in some kind of competition, which in the end sheds light on what we actually do. And the problem is that I would say that more broadly, and it is not only the case in authoritarian regimes, although it might be much more the case than here, but I would say that we do have a huge issue with what we could call scientific culture. I mean that the people, our interlocutors, when we're crossing borders, when we're confronted with policemen, for instance, have a very low information when it comes to understanding what doing science actually entails, what field work means. And this is probably a kind of issue that we also find within public institutions, which do not care really about security, but which care about other things. And I would say, for instance, that even a number of demands when it comes to ethics or ethical screening challenge at times positively, but also at times in a very constraining way, what we can do when it comes to doing to carrying on research. And this is also a problem. For instance, when you need to have a kind of ethical clearance for carrying out research in a number of countries, and you find out that in order to get funding from the ERC, for instance, you will need to get approval from an ERB from the country in which you're going to go to carry out research. I can tell you that, for instance, in Egypt, in any other country, this is not going to happen. They will ask you to go at the Ministry of Interior, and you can imagine that presenting the way that you are going to carry out your research to a policeman is just going to be impossible. And this is also a kind of threat we don't really think about, but it means that I mean, scientific culture is not only understanding what you do in a lab, but it also means that we need to trust also researchers, because they are the ones who are in a way able to actually assess what is happening. I can perfectly understand that we need to be careful, and we need to ask ourselves the number of important questions when we're doing field work, say in Saudi Arabia, of course. We need to be cautious, but we also are the ones who can understand a number of things, and we can understand that getting security clearance from a public, even academic institution in Saudi Arabia will be almost impossible. And there you have a number of, like I've said, contradictory demands, a number of developments which fully make sense in a number of disciplines, but which, when they're applied to the social sciences, are much more difficult to actually implement. I would end also by highlighting a broad issue when it comes to the fact that it is very difficult, if not impossible, to actually imagine a kind of unified status that could help us defend academic freedoms. And yet, we find out, and we've all been concerned when we see just how much, for instance, when journalists are being held hostage, or being kidnapped, or held in prisons by governments, you have a very broad kind of mobilization, which obviously involves the media, but it also involves decision makers. And this is much less the case when we're talking about academics. And this, I think, is probably quite problematic, and there are a number of current discussions when it comes to actually inventing a kind of status for academics. One status that could be recognized internationally and could also help international institutions draw a number of recommendations or a number of red lines. And finally, I would say that we're experiencing a number of worrying trends, which I highlighted, but also I feel, and I know that this conference and this workshop is also one of many which are trying to tackle this issue of academic freedom. I mean, I've come across over the last few weeks or months at least 5 or 6 conferences with a similar topic, and this is something which is very important, which shows that the issue is being tackled. Like I've said, it will probably be very difficult to actually imagine mechanisms of protection and solidarity which always work, but the ones which we will mention today, being PAUSE or InSPIREurope, things which are being pushed forward by the MCSA are very encouraging. There are shortcomings, and we will mention them. I think that the issue of having time constraints, for instance, for 2 years might be problematic. We all know that moving with one's family, for instance, finding and establishing contacts with colleagues in research labs takes a lot of time. And when we see that most wars or most conditions in authoritarian regimes do not go sour for 2 or 3 years, they last for 10 years. And this is also putting pressure. The fact that we're having a program which lasts for 2 years is putting pressure on people, on researchers, on colleagues who are also already under intense pressure. And I think this issue of competition, which is implied by demands for grants or by grants which are limited in time, is one which we all need to think about. I thank you very much for your time. So we're going to have a discussion with a number of the colleagues here. The first round, I guess, is with Farhad. Yeah, to actually present, and we've discussed over the phone what seemed to be a good idea of him actually presenting where he comes from, how he actually ended up benefiting from the PAUSE program, and also later what it actually means in terms of his own involvement in his research lab. I'm sorry, and the difficulties also of having the kind of time constraint that I mentioned, and the competition that I also, not even on, right? Yeah, it's better. This is mute. Where do I switch it on? Yeah, but I think for the online, the people who are online, no. So maybe this one's working. Or? Oh, okay, sorry, because it's mute. Okay, there.
Testing.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, we'll hear about Farhad and his own trajectory and how he ended up benefiting from the pause program. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, so good afternoon, everybody. So thanks a lot, Laurent, for this chairing for this discussion. So I'm Farhad, and basically, as you have explained, so I ended up with working with this program, and after that, I also had an increasing interest on these issues related to academic freedom and also the pathways of at-risk scholars. So, in fact, the issue, so I had my, especially from master and then PhD education I had in France, and then I moved to Turkey to look for better opportunities in terms of teaching and research. And unfortunately, I had a very similar experience as Laurent just spoke just a few minutes ago. So one day, just after my holidays, I go back to Turkey, and I don't know why and for what reason. So I was expelled immediately. So that was a very shocking period, especially when you are an international scholar and you do not even know how the things happen in a third country. So then, of course, seeing the cases of the former colleagues and basically living the condition of so-called exile, when you find out yourself in a country, basically you left, which is quite familiar with you, such as France, but changing wholly your life, your career path, which is quite competitive, we have to say, in academia. I mean, so it's, and on personal level, try to speak about that, and then some universities in Toulouse, basically, before joining this program, they also invited me to speak about it, and then finally I also benefited from the post program, and I really I'm thankful for that, and which basically showed me, and not only me, to many of us, that academic solidarity that Laurent has also pointed out exists, and which is quite important for many exile scholars. So currently I'm doing a research on specific issues, such as one of them is about access to higher education of the people coming, I mean, having refugee or asylum seekers, access to higher education in France, but also giving a seminar specifically on at-risk scholars and integration of at-risk scholars into higher education, academia, or beyond academia. So I'm taking advantage of this opportunity just to give some points, some recommendation that, of course, we have limited time, so I'm just going directly into the issue and leave the time for questions. So as Laurent pointed out, and it's important that at-risk scholars or displaced scholars get a recognition, a status, which could be universal, or at least there must be kind of common consensus on this issue. Of course, it's hard to define, but it's very important to define this issue because it's quite a critical issue when, of course, InSPIReurope projects also underline that many scholars, especially scholars at risk, prefer avoiding refugee status. And instead, they like to integrate directly academia. So that's why finding out this status or recognition would be really beneficial, I mean, at the global level. Of course, this morning we have heard about MSCA program specifically for displaced scholars, which is a very positive path. So starting from 2021, and as Claude Morel identified, that's of course very important from EU stance related to academic freedom and supporting at-risk scholars. However, it's also important to underline that EU must speak as a single voice related to this issue, which is fortunately is still lacking. While on national level, some recommendations or some ideas could be also proposed, I mean, based on the pathways of at-risk scholars. So the cases for specific cases wouldn't be, I mean, even not tenured positions, but some positions for some displaced scholars would be an advantage. It could be symbolically very important advantage if it's proposed by nations. I mean, and public-private cooperation on national level also very important to explain. I mean, to see, as Karen stated, how I mean, academia, it shouldn't be limited only in academia. And finally, I think which is one of the most important issues is that universities' engagement, specifically how universities are engaged directly in protecting academic freedom, but also how they include academic freedom and protecting at-risk scholars into their strategies. How internationalization combines academic freedom beyond, let's say, competition or excellence. So these are the elements which I think should be included and which could be very helpful for many scholars, either in exile or displaced, because that's not only beyond symbolical meaning, it will also provide practical solutions for many scholars. So thank you. I stop
here. So the other. Sorry. Yeah. Before we also follow up with another story of a pause beneficiary. We're going to have a more institutional approach to the mechanisms which have been developed, which will probably answer a number of the challenges which have been highlighted by Farhad. So we'll have Joel Hanisek and Alexandros Triantafilidis, who will present the InSPIReurope project, which is close to its termination, right, in September. Huh? But maybe you want to prolong it with other projects which you'll mention. So I believe we have both of you will discuss and present what you've been doing for the last few years, benefiting from funding by the European Union. Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Laura. Just in case I'm confused, and thanks for bearing with me for the lecture. And I find that if I don't keep to script, the project is so big that I will overrun the time tremendously. And I want to be collegial, make sure that all of our voices are carrying forward this work together. I suppose gathering today to mark MSCA 25 years and to look forward to the next generation of MSCA and the positive changes we anticipate, I just want to say a word of thanks, first of all, to PAUSE Program for this panel, University PSL for hosting, and of course to MSCA, which has enabled the InSPIReurope project to advance support for researchers at risk across Europe. And so I'm aware, given the breadth and scope of the project and what we've heard in the sessions earlier, that some of you may be perhaps unfamiliar with the InSPIReurope project, so I thought perhaps just a rehearsal of the project to gather us on the same page today might be helpful, but of course I anticipate your questions in a more interactive way afterwards. And for those of you who are listening online, I know that there is also opportunity for questions to come in that fashion as well. I'd say just in brief rehearsal then that the Inspire Europe project comprises, as Laura mentioned, 10 organizations. I don't always list them, but I want to do so today to give you specifically who's involved in this program. Of course, we have PAUSE, we have European University Association, Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, so all of those represented at the workshop here today, as well as the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, Jagiellonian University in Krakow, University of Oslo, University of Gothenburg, Schultz Consulting, Training and Coaching, which is based out of Germany, and the UAF Foundation for Refugees in the Netherlands. The project is coordinated by Scholars at Risk Europe from Maynooth University, which is where I'm based, and I also bring you greetings from our director, Sinead O'Gorman, today. So together, this consortium has been working to forge a coordinated, cross-sectoral, Europe-wide alliance for researchers at risk. And I hope that our partners, and perhaps most importantly, our colleagues who have been at risk will agree that since the project was launched in 2019, we have made some headway on this front. Our colleagues who are at risk are at the very heart of this project. When I say at-risk scholars, I'm including researchers and scientists at all stages of their research careers, especially those who are experiencing threats to their life, liberty, and their research career itself, or those who have been displaced because of that status. So it's through this lens of solidarity that gathers us today that we understand that when researchers are at risk and are excluded from participating in the global research circuit, whether that's due to discrimination, persecution, suffering, or violence, not only are individual lives and careers at risk, as Laurent has been articulating, but as well the quality of research itself is at risk. So the Inspire Europe project essentially then begins from the view that excellence in research depends upon open scientific debate, which is ultimately driven by a multiplicity of ideas, multiplicity of people, and a multiplicity of perspectives. Now, in light of the recent and ongoing context of Ukraine and Afghanistan, recognizing as well the situation still in Turkey, Syria, Yemen, as we've heard, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, Myanmar, unfortunately so many more, the project recognizes that we have and are facing record numbers of researchers at risk who are reaching out to Europe, and that as a result there's no one country, government or NGO or enterprise for that matter that could possibly meet the scope of this challenge alone. So we say that we're better together. And just to give some sense of the scale, specifically, I can share that the Scholars at Risk Network has had over 1,400 applications from Afghanistan alone in the past year, so since May of 2021. And this is one of the reasons that the Inspire Europe project organized a Supporting Afghanistan Scholar webinar in order to gather experts from other organizations providing direct support to at-risk researchers and scholars and provide updated information on how institutions in Europe can assist. That's one example of how we're advancing a coordinated approach. And I would say that the things that unite us, these 10 organizations that I've mentioned, and the platform that we're building is a shared commitment to excellence in research, the principle of academic freedom, and through this, the Inspire Europe Consortium has been working to facilitate transnational cooperation between European and national initiatives, as well as to link existing and new programs in support of researchers at risk. Toward that goal, we've been working across a few various levels, and I'll just name them off for you here in brief. One would be a policy level. So on policy recommendations, for instance, we've made efforts to support European researchers at risk and sustain that support over the long term. Mikhail will speak more on that, and I don't need to go into that at the moment, other than to be very thankful for the lead that EUA has provided on that front. We also have been working on growing the network of actors and initiatives supporting researchers at risk, especially in Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe. Alexandros will speak more on that, and so I don't need to say much more other than to be extremely thankful for the generous work that Aristotle University of Thessaloniki has been providing on that front. There's also been significant exchange and peer learning that's been facilitated by the consortium. And an example of this specifically would be our recent stakeholder forum, which was held in Berlin just 2 weeks back. This was a joint hosting by the Inspire Europe project and the Philip Schwartz initiative of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, which gathered more than 250 participants, including at-risk scholars, academic mentors, university administrators, and representatives from national, European, and international partner organizations. Now, I don't know, for those of you who are in the room, where you would position yourself in the midst of that list, but I imagine that you may fit in one of those categories. And if not, I'd be very interested to hear how you would describe yourself and what brings you to this work so that we can figure out how to, again, continue to broaden that base. Recognizing that we're probably better suited to using time for interactive dialogue, I'll just push forward towards a conclusion to say that one other point of work that InSPIRE Europe has been advancing has been that of providing training, guidance, and coaching for employers and researchers at risk who are working towards long-term professional perspectives in both academic and non-academic sectors. This point about approaches to non-academic sectors came up, I think, fairly strongly in the interventions that we heard during the morning sessions. And it has been a growing edge for the consortium in terms of working towards a common goal of acknowledging, welcoming, and fostering the talent of researchers at risk. In that regard, a webinar hosted by the University of Oslo on research careers outside of academia explored researchers at risk and transitions to other sectors as one example of the way in which we might move forward on this subject. Another example of this work pursued through the consortium has been an ongoing conversation with the Tent Partnership for Refugees on ways that the consortium might cooperate on activities within Europe so that academics and researchers who are outside of the refugee process, as we just heard, might also have access to the various mentoring and other opportunities in the network of companies that Tent has been facilitating and building. And I do think that's an important point to underscore, is that many of the researchers at risk are coming to this through labor mobility pathways, and so we need to be cognizant of the difference that makes in terms of the approach to the work. Finally, I'll just mention that InSPIRE Europe has also been promoting support measures for at-risk researchers that are already in place in national and European levels, and also encouraging the replication, expansion, and perhaps, I won't say most importantly, but also importantly, capacity building. In that regard, PAUSE has in fact been one of the models that we've been looking to most regularly and strongly, and we're very fortunate that PAUSE co-authored a report along with Alexander von Humboldt Foundation on national level initiatives for researchers at risk that are taking place in Europe. And I recommend to those of you who might be interested in this particular aspect of the work, it looks at good practices, ongoing and novel, in 14 different European countries to support researchers at risk, and I think is quite a helpful and accessible resource, both for understanding existing national level initiatives in Europe, as well as for anyone who might be interested in establishing new initiatives within their own countries. And if you are interested in establishing new initiatives in your own country, whether you're in the room or you're listening, we would certainly encourage you to be in touch with us so that we can help to be part of that conversation and support that work. I'll close now just with a remark that we're now, as Laurent mentioned, in grant preparation phase for the next iteration of this work, which is InSPIRE Europe Plus, again with thanks to MSCA. So InSPIRE Europe Plus, as you were wondering, will continue the work which we've been doing to combine national and institutional building in solidarity with researchers at risk, and will also continue to build up the skills and knowledge to access European, national, and institutional funding and support. And I should say that on this point in particular, we do appreciate the MSCA guidelines for inclusion of researchers at risk in particular. With that said, I will just conclude by saying that we're doing this work together with our colleagues who are at risk at the moment. So these are our colleagues who are scholars. At the moment they're at risk, we recognize that this is a movable designation and that it could occur in various points at various times. So we look forward to, in solidarity, continuing this project to improve lives and career opportunities, as well as increase institutional capacity and preparedness. And I invite you to stay tuned for the work we do under InSPIRE Europe Plus, and I thank you in advance for any questions you might have.
Alexander, yes. You want to talk here or sit?
You can get up, I think it's easier. So I'm Alexandros Triantafylidis from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. I would like to thank PAUSE for inviting me here, MSCA for giving us the chance to work on the important issue of academic freedom and supporting scholars at risk. I bring here the experience of academics. I am a biologist. I'm a professor of biology and genetics. And I bring here again the experience of university. We are 4 universities within InSPIREurope, the University of Göteborg, the University of Oslo. These both represent well-established SAR sections which have been working for the support of scholars at risk even before the establishment of the InSPIREurope project. On the other hand, there's the Jagiellonian University and there's Aristotle University from 2 countries which were not, at least at the start of the project, ready to have the infrastructure to support scholars at risk. So in many ways, what I can present is the fact that we are not as lucky as France, which had the top-down initiative where, of course, a lot of universities were very, very much interested to be part of this initiative and to start supporting the numerous hundreds of scholars at risk that has happened during these difficult times for the world. And so this is where Aristotle University and Jagiellonian University took the responsibility of trying to work more and to motivate more universities in Southern Europe and Eastern Europe as regards support of scholars at risk. This has not been easy, and thankfully we have some good results, and I'll go there. But I will present some challenges that we have faced until now. But if it wasn't for the InSPIREurope, maybe we would be far behind. It's definitely an issue of supporting academic freedom, and though all European universities are very supporting of that, when it comes to actions, I think we're very, very far behind. In Greece, this is where we started from in Aristotle University. It has been a slow process. We had talks about creating some kind of support for scholars at risk from the past before the start of InSPIREurope. We had discussed with the SAR network. Keep in mind that right now there are 13 or 14 different SAR sections already in Europe, but this is mostly in Central and Northern Europe. So thanks to InSPIREurope and thanks to the workshops we were able to do, where we also had the chance and the luck maybe, but also the support of the Greek Commissioner for European Way of Life, Margaritis Chinas, we got things moving. So after many, many years, like these talks had started like in 2018, where we became the first SAR support university in Greece. We just launched the first SAR section in Greece, the SAR section in Greece in 2021. We are now 6 universities in Greece that are part of the SAR section, the SAR Greece section. I'm happy to say that today I got word that another Greek university is becoming a member. So we're 7. There's another 7 universities that seem to be interested to be part of the SAR section. And so maybe we are like, hopefully maybe in 1 year, half of the Greek universities will be motivated to support scholars at risk. But being motivated does not mean that there are things always running fast. The main problem, of course, is funding. Until now, there has been very few opportunities for support of scholars at risk within Greece, mostly from within university money, from Aristotle University, from the University of Aegean, from the University of Ionian, which have given their own money for that. And of course, it's not only the funding per se, there's a lot and millions of administrative issues that scholars at risk need to face when trying to be integrated into the university. And that does not have to do only with research, with teaching. It has to do with a lot of things that InSPIREurope project has highlighted and given support through the different webinars that are available. So in Greece, we are moving slowly. In order to do that, it needs a lot of time. There have been discussions with the rectors' conferences, with the deputy minister of education, who seems, this specific one right now, to be supportive because of the Ukrainian situation as well. We were happy enough that we were even invited by our President of the Republic of the Democracy, Her Excellency Katerina Sakellarapoulou, so we got a lot of publicity for that. But still, I think there's a lot of work to be done. We have also worked quite a lot very recently with a workshop trying to motivate Eastern European universities. This, as you understand, is much more difficult to be implemented for various financial and political reasons. We had quite a lot of contributors and participants from various Balkan countries and Eastern European countries. Taking into consideration the situation in Ukraine, I think it was just a very, very, very small step, and hopefully with Inspire Europe Plus, we will be able to do more. That is our aim for the next 3 years as well. As I said, the challenges, of course, are there. The MSCA for Ukraine project is very much needed in order to motivate more universities to be part of this network of universities of support. Of course, as we're talking with our Jagiellonian partner in Poland, there's a lot of things to be thought of and to be integrated in the discussions of how such a project will work. There are hundreds of Ukrainian professors right now in Poland who are living there, teaching within the Polish universities and who are part of those universities. And we definitely need a new project, a new way of supporting scholars at risk, which of course will support the already existing infrastructures in SAR sections in Central Europe or Southern Europe. SAR Italy is also very good for that. But also it needs to take into consideration the fact that those Ukrainian professors are there, they want to stay there, and they need the support, the administrative support of those Polish universities, which have spent enormous manpower, money, in order to support them. I can only be optimistic, and I can only say that we all need to pressure our rectors, our governments, each one of us, in order to not find ourselves at some point where even in our countries suddenly we find problems of being able to speak for our freedom and for what we believe in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandros. So the next segment of the discussion will be with Michael Gaibal, who is the director of European University Association, and he will present a number of recommendations by Inspire Europe. So policy recommendations that have come out from the experience of the project.
Yes, thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. Probably a few words of introduction on my organization. We are the European level umbrella organization of more than 800 universities and 34 national rectors conferences from the geographical Europe, the Europe of the Council of Europe. And we are part, as Joël said already, in the Inspire Europe consortium, and have been involved in campaigning and promoting support for researchers at risk, basically ever since EUA came into existence, but more systematically since 2014, when we had the arrival of numerous refugees from Europe. In the Inspire Europe consortium, we have a double perspective. It's the one side, I think, is the solidarity with international academics. But at the same time, we are also in there from the perspective of the hosting universities, so universities which host researchers at risk. Joël told you already a bit about what the Inspire Europe does, and I will delve a bit more into that and highlight two particular outputs. One was a mapping report that we did in 2020-21. So we looked at existing studies on researchers at risk, but also conducted our own surveys, had focus group and interviews which were targeting hosting universities, but also support organizations such as PAWS or the Alexander von Humboldt, and also very importantly researchers at risk, because that we thought this is very important to listen to the researchers themselves. So it has the multiple perspective, and which I think makes the results so rich and insightful. This is now the disadvantage here in being in such a hybrid environment. I don't have a printed copy with me, and I also can't share the link here, but you can Google them, and we can also send them to you afterwards. What the report brought is actually, it showed the excellent work which higher education institutions and many organizations, often it's done in collaboration with NGOs, do already across Europe to support researchers at risk. And as these are sometimes smaller organizations, this is not always and immediately visible. It also confirmed that there is much more demand for placements by researchers at risk than places are actually available. And that has to do also with funding. Higher education institutions would often be willing to take in more researchers at risk, but as they have usually to fund it out of their own budget, out of their own means, they only can afford 1 or 2 placements, if at all. If you look at the funding that researchers usually rely on, so national and European research funding programs, you will quickly realize that they are usually not accessible for researchers at risk, or only with great difficulties. I get back to that. And then there are, of course, some usually national funding programs, and some have already been mentioned here, but they do not exist, as Alexandros also said, they do not exist in every country. And so that's a bit the situation. And on the basis of this report, we have then issued a set of recommendations which are targeted in particular at policymakers at European and national level, but as well at higher education institutions and also some other actors and stakeholders such as private sector employers. And I'm not going to explain or to summarize all the 8 recommendations here, but just to give you a taste of it. The first recommendation is actually about a political rationale. It acknowledges, it asks governments to acknowledge and support researchers at risk in higher education and research, and to do so as a matter of defending academic freedom and as a contribution to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, this is not banal, and also because this is not our idea, and in essence also not our wording, but this is what you can find when you read European and also international policy documents that have been issued over the recent years. Claire mentioned that this morning, that there is a stronger emphasis on academic freedom and values in higher education that has been, well, I think it has been emerging over the last couple of years. Not that we didn't cherish academic freedom before, but we probably took it for granted, and we assumed that the problems that we have with it are temporarily, and we might overcome them as we are moving all towards democracy and more liberal world. But I think we have understood that this is probably not the case. At least it's not going to happen automatically. So you find these ideas in, for example, in the Bologna Process Declaration. You find that in the Bonn Declaration of 21 on freedom of scientific research. You find that in the European University Strategy that Claire mentioned this morning. And so that's the first recommendation that we put together there, to ammunition anyone who wants to address this with her government or universities, to support researchers at risk, and to remind them this is what you committed to, and now it's about to you to act upon that. And then the other 7 recommendations, they are basically about what governments and what other actors should do. And this is in particular about funding, but also about integration and visa and other issues. I stick in particular to the funding issue there, that takes a big room in our recommendations. And we asked that national and AU level should create specific programs to support researchers at risk, but also enable access to existing programs. And we also provide some good practice examples there. Like, for example, in the MSA has made some changes to make the programs better accessible for researchers at risk. I mean, you can probably understand that why programs that are created for researchers are difficult for researchers at risk, as, for example, they require to have a home university which supports you, which you often don't have. They may also ask you to become mobile during your fellowship, which is probably the last thing that you want to do after you had just had an odyssey through a number of countries and would just like to settle down and try to get your life in order. So all this is there briefly explained, but then there is an annex there with further details and resources, including links to policy documents, publications, webinars, and. This includes also a very detailed suggestion for a European level scholarship program to be provided by the European Commission. This is a bit a flagship recommendation of the InSPIREurope project. We are promoting this now for a number of years and have further developed this project proposal, and we hope that this will become at some stage a reality. That was the first point of my intervention. I wanted to make a second point here, and that has to do with the MSCA Ukraine Fellowship Program that Claire mentioned this morning. And congratulations once again to MSCA. This comes in right time for your 25th birthday, so it shows the potential of the program, how diverse and versatile it becomes. And I'm looking at Claire, and thanks to you and your colleague, we know that this was not an easy thing to do. It needed quite some tweaking to adjust the program to the needs of researchers at risk. This measure has been recently adopted under the Horizon Europe Work Program 2021-2022. It will provide dedicated fellowships for displaced researchers from Ukraine to continue their research. So they could be either doctoral candidates enrolled in a doctoral program, or also postdoctoral researchers. That means they have already a doctoral degree. It addresses Ukrainian nationals or other nationals from third countries residing in Ukraine, which have been displaced on or after the 24th of February 2022. They would be hosted by academic or non-academic organizations in any EU member state or in another Horizon Europe associated country. And it will also comprise measures for reintegration of these researchers into Ukraine once it is safe for them to return. Broadly spoken, all these fellowships will be in line with the MSCA work program. And I mention it also here because this will be done in a single beneficiary procedure through a subset of the InSPIRE consortium consisting of Scholars at Risk, the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and the EUA. And we are currently in the process of preparing this program, or to prepare the application first, and then hopefully this will be adopted, and in the second half of this year the program can then start. I think this is about all the information that we can provide on this at the moment. And I think that's an important step, of course, an important development that will help Ukrainian researchers. I mentioned before that one of our main recommendations was to establish a European level program for researchers at risk. So the question would now, has this been achieved? And then the answer is actually no, not yet quite. Well, what we have at the moment will be, or what we will have from this autumn on, will be a temporary program which will benefit researchers from Ukraine. What we are actually pushing for and will continue to push for is a permanent country agnostic program, as it has been also demonstrated here this afternoon. Ukraine is not the only place where researchers are at risk. The approach that we suggested to implement also foresees measures to strengthen existing and emerging European national programs. And Alexandros just explained to you how difficult it is when you have to build it up from the ground, and also hinted that the situation in Greece was probably not the most difficult ones. There are more challenging settings that you can have at national level. Importantly, this program would not just be about funding. The funding part is, of course, very, very important, but it's about visibility, awareness, it's about recognition, and also about empowerment. Again, Claire mentioned this morning the example of the MSCA Charter, or the Researchers Charter, and how, which is, I think, a very good example how things that we do at European level, how they can have an impact and change national but also institutional approaches across Europe. So I think such a program would be really useful to develop a European dimension that we have done, and this is something that we have done in many other areas of collaboration, and that we do this also for the support of researchers at risk. And as we have seen from other things that we have done at European level, this can have a strong impact also beyond Europe. So we are really grateful that the MSCA Ukraine approach has been, or it's not yet launched, but is under preparation and will be launched this autumn. I think this is a really, really good development. This is good news for the colleagues from Ukraine, but we also see that as a step ahead towards a permanent approach that we think Europe would deserve also to demonstrate how it cherishes its values. So that's from me. Thanks.
So among the last speakers that we're going to hear today is Refet Ali Yalcid, who has been a PAUSE alumni, so he benefited from a PAUSE program, and he will tell us about his own trajectory, and especially the fact that after PAUSE he managed to secure an MSCA funding, which is something that probably many of the PAUSE beneficiaries would love to achieve themselves. So we discussed also with Refet earlier, and I thought that it was also important to acknowledge that he himself is a mechanical engineer, if I remember correctly, and so this generates a kind of different dimension, because it is not strictly his own work or his own research which generated his troubles, but things which come aside and which imply that we also need, as institutions, as colleagues, to understand that the disconnection that we would establish between research itself and external activities is not always relevant. So if you could just tell us a bit how you ended up with PAUSE, first of all, how things went with PAUSE, and how this actually helped you to secure the MSCA.
Thank you for the introduction. Actually, I came from Turkey, and I'm a mechanical engineer, so test. Okay, I think okay, I am a mechanical engineer and not in a social science field, but I signed a petition against Turkish Republic which condemns the their crime on Kurdish people, and with a few I think like hundreds of academics, we've been accused of terrorism propaganda, and prosecutor asked for up to 7.5 year imprisonment. And till then, I was a PhD student, and I was also a teaching assistant. I wasn't thinking of moving abroad. I haven't ever applied for master's or PhD abroad. But because of this situation, urgently I seek places, and I luckily found PAUS, and thanks to them, they respond quite quickly. Also, I got quick responses from the universities that I wrote. I got 3 out of 4. And then after the first trial in Turkey, before the second, I moved to France with my wife and our then 3-month-old baby. Actually, it wasn't that hard, thanks to the conditions. But still, I only knew bonjour for the French. And I moved to Poitiers, a small city, so there weren't available language courses. Also, for a year, I couldn't get French class, and it was hard to make shopping, etc. But in the university, of course, there were no problems. Then, after I came to France, the government ordered an arrest warrant, and I couldn't return to Turkey for a while. During that time, I worked so hard, really. I wasn't used to work that hard in Turkey. When you are, I didn't apply for a refugee, but when you are in a refugee status, I mean, I don't know why, but you feel like you need to work more. It's what I feel. I also talked with this with my former supervisor in United States. He is from France, and he also said that when I come here, he had went for PhD, but he said I also felt the same. You need to prove yourself, you need to work hard. Actually, it contributes to the countries that we move. And in Nantes, Athens, I went to several conferences, and they helped a lot to me to find collaborations. And I got invitation from the professor I mentioned, Professor Pilon from UCLA, and I applied for Fulbright Fellowship, which is like a US version of Marie Curie individual fellowship. It was more a bit cultural maybe, but after I came here, it was surprising that my application to work in the laboratory refused because of security reasons. At that time, because of conflict between Turkish Republic and France, CNRS just doesn't let people that work on private projects. Normally, I worked on nano antenna to improve photosynthesis of the plant, but since there is nano antenna, they thought that I can generate some kind of military device that can hack fancy stuff, which is unreal, of course. But then, thanks to my professor, he convinced CNRS that he's from us. He came with PAUS. He's for French people, and luckily they convinced. He convinced the people from CNRS. So I started my project on October. I think that's all from my side. For my child is now 3 years old, and he's attending to school. He's having some kind of difficulties, of course, because of the language barrier. For a year, he learned some English, now turning to French, and at home, he's we are speaking in Turkish, so it's a bit complicated for him. But except that, we are happy to be here. And yes, I also want to talk about the investment and the 1 year or 2 year restrictions. Yes, we feel that pressure. I also currently feel, and I'm applying even about the industry. I think within 2 weeks I will get in touch with, come here for talk with Saint-Gobain for like thermal engineering. I'm also looking for academic positions. I applied for CNRS and it wasn't all good. I passed the first stage, but I failed in the last one. They didn't pick me, and it's a part of the game. I know it's stressful, but when I start PhD, I accept the fact that it's how the academia is, and like also to get this the pause. I mean, I really appreciate it again, but I feel uncomfortable, not because I'm ashamed of it. On the contrary, I mentioned in my 5 article that I acknowledge pause to give me that opportunity. But I feel like I'm occupying a place, maybe a person who has a more urgent situation than me can occupy this. So I felt bad about this and I tried to finish it as soon as possible. And also, I think we should make the distinction between our case as like scholars at risk and the young academics. I mean, I think most of the problem we have is also same for young academics too. And I think it's better for us to work specifically, not specifically on that for academics at risk, but in general, like it's also the case for like Marie Curie. I don't know if they provide, but I haven't yet, an orientation to involve in like after research life, like in companies, etc. But I think not on academics at risk level, but on like young researchers level, there should be more good level orientation. Thank you.
So the last segment before we get to the questions and answers will be Laura Doeac from the executive director of the PAUSE program, who will present what's currently being done regarding Ukraine. So much like in connection, I think with InSPIREurope, what's been created. So yeah, you'll have another 10 minutes, but you know about the deal.
So good morning, good afternoon again. The war in Ukraine is a disruptive event with incalculable repercussion in geopolitical, economic, food supply consequences, but also with repercussions in the academic field. These consequences are still difficult to grasp in the long term, but the massive displacement of scientific communities, the repression and implementation of a system of censorship and attacks on freedom of expression and academic freedom are unprecedented on the European continent since the Second World War, and as such raise unprecedented challenges. It is important to us to be able to address these challenges through this workshop, and the answers we collectively, the member states, but also the EU and the Commission, can provide in the short and longer terms. So first, let me give you a brief overview of the situation and initiatives that have been taken. The war provoked by Russia has plunged 1.3 million students and 95,000 Ukrainian scientific personnel, including 60,000 researchers, into a dramatic situation. According to the initial estimations from Science for Ukraine's collective, a total of 27,000 scientific personnel could be forced to leave the country. At this stage, the vast majority have actually remained in the country for legal, moral, or financial reasons, but 3,000 to 4,000, above all women, have gone into exile, and the majority of them are or will be in the perspective to return as soon as possible. However, the evolution of the situation remains very unpredictable. In the face of this tragedy, we have seen the higher education and research community mobilizing massively all over the world, in Europe, and in particular in Ukraine's closest neighbors. Initiatives have been taken very quickly. On the 1st of March, the Polish Academy of Science launched a support program consisting of the allocation of 3 months stipends to Ukrainian researchers still affiliated to their institution in Ukraine. 200 scholars have benefited from this measure, and the Polish Academy of Science is now able to provide for up to 6 months stipends and organize internships and works actively to support the restoration of academia in Ukraine. The German Philipp Schwarz initiative from the Humboldt Foundation set up an emergency fund for researchers and scholars who had to flee Ukraine, and this fund is supported by private foundations. They will support 35 to 40 Ukrainian scientists for up to 6 months. 107 nominations have been submitted to PSI, and they are currently working to obtain additional funding. Initiatives have also been taken in the Czech Republic, in Austria, Latvia, Italy, and Sweden, which are helping the Ukrainian academic community, most of them by offering funding. In France, the 2nd of March, POSE launched, in conjunction with the Ministry for Higher Education and Research, an emergency fund called Solidarité Ukraine, dedicated to financing the reception of Ukrainian scientists in universities and research centers for up to 3 months. The objective was first to respond to the emergency and to allow them to be sheltered with their families in order to prepare the next step, a longer scientific stay in France, or, as we all hope, a return to a peaceful Ukraine, which will allow the Iranian families and the reconstruction. To date, more than 220 applications have been submitted to the emergency fund. 115 have already benefited from this support, and most of them, women with their families, have arrived in France. The others are currently being processed, and some of them have already submitted an application for the POSE regular program for 6 additional months. As all our partners, we are still working on mobilizing additional resources. This surge of solidarity at local and national levels in our universities, within our research organizations, and within our national agency must be supported and strengthened. The urgency of and the gravity of the situation call for an ambitious and effective response, both in the short and longer term. In the short term, to respond to the emergency by supporting and hosting Ukrainian academics, and in the longer term, to support the reconstruction. Simultaneously, as it is important to remain vigilant against the risk of brain drain, it is necessary to support Ukrainian academics in their country for those, the vast majority, who do not want or cannot want to leave. The Ukrainian authorities and the Science for Ukraine collective are also trying to promote the idea of funding at distance these people, because it's difficult as the legal framework is complex to implement, but it's an avenue to explore. Concerning the immediate response in the member states, the priority for the EU should to drive a coordinated approach adapted to the heterogeneity of the situation, capitalizing on the experience of existing programs, reinforcing the existing initiatives that have already taken support measures, and providing, where they do not exist, the means to welcome the Ukrainian scientists. With the 25 million euro MSCA emergency fund to support the Ukrainian scientific community, the European Union is making a first necessary and concrete contribution to provide higher education and research institutions in the member states and associated countries with the means to host Ukrainian colleagues so that they can continue their work and to prepare to rebuild their country. This initiative follows the agreement on a definition of academic freedom by the Bologna process members and a series of declarations these last few years, such as the Bonn Declaration or the Marseille Declaration presented the 8th of March in the framework of the French presidency of the European Union, which places the principles of academic freedom and the openness of science among the core values of the European Union in its cooperation, international cooperation. And in parallel, the Commission prepares guideline principles on values, including the academic freedom. These initiatives send an encouraging message that academic freedoms and the protection of at-risk academics is now part of EU's agenda. The establishment of the MSCA for Ukraine Fund is to be welcome. But as a rescue program, we hope that it will be the first step in building a longer and broader mechanism for all at-risk researchers, as called for the InSPIREurope consortium and its recommendations presented by Michael. In addition to the scientists fleeing the war in Ukraine, several thousand Russian researchers who have taken stand against the war and who are not able to work anymore, are fleeing Putin's dictatorship. Unlike their Ukrainian colleagues, this exile is destined to be a long-term exile. This tragedy comes on the top of those of the return of refugees in Afghanistan, the ethnic cleansing in Ethiopia, conflict in the Near and Middle East that are destroying already fragile academic communities, political repression in Africa, South America, and Asia, geopolitical but also sanitary and climatic crises are multiplying. In order to provide the most effective and rapid support possible to the academic communities affected to this crisis and current or future crises, which are likely to increase the number of scientists seeking exile, we need to implement an ambitious policy today, but also in the longer term. At the national level, to structure our program and initiative by strengthening their capacities, and at the European level, by coordinating our efforts to make the European Union a haven of peace for the freedom of scientific research and the democratic value and solidarity that are at the heart of the European project. So this workshop provided an opportunity to hear the testimony and the recommendation of 2 scientists in exile, and to measure how complex the challenge they face are in integrating the scientific community in France. It allowed us to discuss the possible levers of action of the European Union in crisis management in the area of European research, and to reflect on how member states can be supported in their action of scientific solidarity. The implementation of this recommendation could be an ambition for the next generation MSCA in opening this new era for change. Thank you very much for your attention.
Timing has been just perfect. So we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A. There might be a microphone needed. I don't know if one is provided. Otherwise, if you can just stand up and mention where your institution is from and who you want to address your question to. Thank you. And you can also, it's also possible to ask questions if you're following online.
Yes, thank you. My name is Kristin Krav. I'm the Marie Curie NCP in Estonia. And like many other countries, my country has also mobilized a lot of support for displaced Ukrainians. We are also looking with great anticipation to the new program, the MSCA for Ukraine. So I'm familiar with how it is envisioned in the work program. And thank you very much for actually presenting the rest of the work that the InSPIREurope consortium has been doing. I must say that in my country, let's say the interest in topics related to research as at risk has grown considerably since not a very high level before the Ukrainian war. So we have, our government has not been very much active in supporting researchers at risk before, but now they are very eager to support researchers at risk, and of course this momentum must be used. But my question is very practical and very short actually. So what is the timeline that you foresee for the rolling out of the new program, and when do you think that you will be able to present the details and also to actually start supporting these researchers? Thank you.
Good. It's an excellent question, Kristin, and thank you so much. It's good to hear the voice from, or the perspective from Estonia as well. And I would just say one of the things that you remark upon is this increased interest in engaging with researchers at risk, which I know that over lunch some of us were speaking. It's not that this is new, but that there is momentum here, and we're hopeful to gather in that momentum and to use it to build those permanent sustainable structures that we're hoping to build for the long term, not just in this moment, although of course in this moment there are specific needs which we need to address quite quickly on a short time scale. So that's by way of preface. Your question, I think, was specific to the time scale. And I would note, I suppose, two things. One is that the dedicated consortium that Michael had mentioned, which will be applying for this program, and I underscore the fact that we will be applying for it. So it's important to clarify that we're very grateful for the opportunity to apply, that the application is still in process, and that we would anticipate that application will be tendered, I think, by mid-June would be our timescale. In terms of follow-up, perhaps Michael might want to speak to one or two more points beyond that sort of initial framework.
You know, I guess the question was when can researchers and institutions start to apply for it, wasn't it?
Yes, I should have
Yeah.
mentioned that. Of course, in the event that the European Commission awards you the grant, which we find quite likely.
Yes. No, it's a single beneficiary. I mean, Claire is here. She might say a word about the legal side of that. I used to know that under a negotiated procedure, basically. So we have to get it right so that they can award us the grant, and then we. And part of what we are submitting is actually the whole process of how this program will function. And this is a bit terra incognita. I mean, we look, of course, at national levels, national level program, existing programs, which have done that already. ZAR has a lot of experience in placements. PAUSE, Alexander von Humboldt, and others have awarded fellowship programs. And so all this will be taken into consideration and also ensure, and I think that's important for you, that there is a good spread in the program. So I think that's really something that, at least from my understanding, that the program has to achieve. It has to become European and benefit researchers for different destinations in Europe. I mean, we heard already this afternoon some countries are doing actually quite well, but it's really the idea that this would also, how do you say, enable non-traditional destinations in Europe. So, and I think at the moment we really can't say much more than in the second half of the year. That's well.
No. I mean, I suppose we're all responding as quickly as we can, and so MSCA has done an absolutely fantastic job in terms of pushing this forward. We're really working hard to try to bring it off the ground as quickly as possible because we know that the need is there. And just to underscore what Michaela said, that this is absolutely a Europe-wide program, so we would absolutely look forward to engaging with Estonia and neighboring countries, and we'll be looking forward to being in conversation with you and others on that point as we anticipate a smooth rollout of this.
And colleagues work on that while we sit here as part of the reason for the terrible gender balance. So I don't know, Claire, do you want to say something?
Yes, well, indeed, this project for the support of Ukrainian researchers, which is funded in the framework of the Marie Sklodowska Action. Yes, it is. Yeah, it's something quite unusual. I mean, we do this for the first time, and we had to follow the normal commission procedures, which are what they are. So we had to review the work program and to be able to include this new project. We are following a procedure as well, which is unusual. It's a procedure we use normally for emergency procedure. It means that we have identified the beneficiary, so there will not be an open competition or a call for proposal, because this would have taken another 6 months. So we had identified the consortium that already works with us, the InSPIREurope project, the consortium. And so the project, if retained, I mean, there will be only one application, would go to them. So we hear from them that the project will be ready to be submitted by mid-June, and then we will try to make work as fast as possible to get it off the ground. But then we have the summer coming, which is not an ideal, of course, timing for universities and research centers. But I would think that maybe by the end of the summer, the first call would be published. But we're still, there are still these ongoing discussions, about to know how the calls would be organized. Would it be, would there be cut-off dates, or will it be a rolling call or things like this? This is still being discussed. We are not used to work that fast in the framework of a huge program like MSCA in the framework of Horizon Europe. But can I ask a question as well? Because one of the objectives of the Inspire Europe program was to inspire other countries, those countries that do not have, like Estonia maybe yet, schemes to support researchers at risk. And if a country is interested, hasn't done it yet, but looking at the experience of the large consortium, wants to do it, what would you advise them to do? If and I see we heard the experience of Greece, where this was quite of a novelty. So if someone is listening to you and is interested in setting up something similar, what you would advise them to do? To contact you? Or?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much, Claire. I think we have some good news to share. I think that SAR is in contact with some very good colleagues from Bulgaria. So maybe, hopefully, very soon, SAR Bulgaria will be a new section that will be prepared to support scholars from institutes in Bulgaria. We are here, all of us, all partners and academic partners, especially which have formed SAR sections already, are here to help. There is a lot of collaboration among us. We were helped a lot even from SAR Italy. We are ready to help our partners and our neighbors, Bulgaria, in order to do that. What needs to be done is a lot of work, a lot of meetings, a lot of telephones, a lot of workshops as well. Workshops where you invite people, those interested from many different universities, and you try to tell them to come. Some will come, some will not. You come, you go again, you repeat, you fail, you repeat, you fail, and that's the way it works. We are really, really happy for the MSCA for Ukraine. This is something that we will also use within Greece now to knock on the door of ministries of education, of the National Scholarship Foundation as well, to tell them, okay, now there is something from Europe, why don't you do something on the national front as well? So this is a very, very important step for us, and this is what we're going to continue doing. Even in the last months of Inspire Europe, our next steps are actually going to be there, more motivation, more talking with people. And this is the networking that is the most important that needs to be done. And that's a lot of manpower and a lot of voluntary work sometimes, which is not scored or something, but definitely needs to be done. And we're here to help always.
The only thing which I would add to Alexandros' point in response to your question, Claire, is I had mentioned briefly in my presentation the National Level Actions Report for Researchers at Risk, of which Paz was a co-author. So that report, as well as other publications which may be useful for resources, particularly for emerging national level actions, can be found at the SAR Europe website, so SAR Europe /InSPIReurope. And that particular national level report, for instance, would give 14 different examples that countries could look to as a model, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all model, that each country is going to be coming with its own history and its own contributions to this conversation. But the whole point of this transnational coordination function is to recognize that within the European context, we are better doing this together, and we're stronger when we're supporting researchers at risk in a coordinated fashion.
And of course, they can always contact us. Yeah. So.
Are there questions online? Or other questions in the room? I would maybe like to ask a question, maybe to Laura or more generally. One point which was highlighted in the discussions, particularly regarding Ukraine, was the implication of neighboring countries. We do have at the European level or of the member states networks of research institutes, mainly in the social sciences, which are generally funded by member states. I'm thinking of an institution I know well, which is the IFPO, so French Institute for the Near East. But you can also think about the Orient Institute in Beirut, German foundations like the Konrad Adenauer, which has offices in a number of countries. And I was wondering if you considered either at PAUSE or with Inspire Europe, if these mechanisms and the focus being put on these types of institutions, which are in neighboring countries and some of them are themselves, I mean, countries which put scholars at risk, but it might be there might be some leverage there to actually support also these institutions, because when we're thinking about historians, sociologists, etc., it might be more fruitful to actually send them to these kinds of institutions. Say a Syrian who can benefit from the networks in Beirut, for instance, and also find collaborations much more fruitful than being sent to I don't know, Poitiers, which I like, or Toulouse or Paris, where there is some kind of atomization which exists. And which creates further challenges, I think, for integration of the scholars.
Regarding PAUSE principle, the idea is to co-fund French institutions, so they can be in France, in the French territory, but they can be also abroad. So it would be totally possible to host a scientist in an institution abroad. École Française de Rome, for example, applied a few years ago, so it would be possible.
Yeah, but the issue is then that these are generally small institutions and that have little money.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no comparison with a large university.
For the others.
I guess what we said about the MSCA Ukraine approach, that is probably should also be a general principle that it is open for any academic but also non-academic institutions, as long as there's as they do research, so not excluded. If it's probably then also a question where the individual scholars want to go to, and whether somebody from Syria wants to go to Beirut, for example, and so these issues. But principally, yes, one should probably. When we looked at it, I think what we found is that, and that is supports your point, that we always think about higher education institutions, universities, but the landscape is of course much broader, so that should be explored. But the main thing is then generally the funding. Yeah? So there's a lot of willingness, a lot of interest also to host. But as you said yourself, Laurent, not every institution has necessarily the funding to pay for it.
Well, I was asked to conclude, so thank you very much for attending this session. I don't have specific concluding remarks, but I think that it's very important to also listen to the experiences, and I know that each of the institutions actually do that. But it's important to emphasize that money is not only the issue, and that you do have problems with integration and timing, which are also very central, as the experiences have highlighted. Thank you very much. And I think this is the last session of the day, right? Oh no, you have other ones. Huh? Oh,
Where? But not here.
Not here. Not
Yeah.
here.
Okay.
Coffee break.